I was concerned that much of the building that was taking place in the Islamic world had lost its sense of direction. There was a hiatus in cultural continuity. There was a lack of clarity and precision in the educational institutions that were forming the young architects of the future. I profoundly believed that architecture is not just about building, it is a means of improving people's quality of life. At its best, it should mirror the plurality of cultural traditions and the diverse needs of communities, both urban and rural. At the same time, it must employ modern technologies to help fulfill desirable aspirations for the future. I am also concerned that there is still too little attention being paid to design for communities to protect residents from the effects of earthquakes, many of them in remote rural areas. 2 million people died as a result of earthquakes in the last century, and 100 million were severely affected. There are vast populations that live in seismic sensitive high mountain areas where we must focus attention. And the massive devastation of the Indian Ocean's tsunami has taught us a terrible lesson that the destructive power of earthquakes can reach far beyond the initial disturbance. It will no doubt lead to new thinking and new approaches towards seaside construction. So we are by no means at the end of our task. To quote Churchill, we may be at the end of the beginning.
یا علی مدد، خوش آمدید بیانوینو. نام من هوس مدوجی است. خوشحالم که از شما در یک برنامه بازتاب جمعه شب دیگر استقبال میکنم. من میخواهم از همه اعضای جماعت، اعضای خانواده های چند اعتقادی و همه کسانی که از کانادا و سراسر جهان با ما پیوستند استقبال ویژه‌ای داشته باشم. امیدوارم هفته جالبی داشته باشید و از حضور اعضای خانواده های چند اعتقادی از درون جماعت ما در هفته گذشته لذت برده باشید. اکنون به پایان ماه می نزدیک می شویم. در این زمان از سال ما به طور معمول در حال آماده شدن برای راهپیمایی مشارکت جهانی و یا World Partnership Walk هستیم. حداقل در اینجا در کانادا. و ناراحت کننده است که یک سال دیگر بدون راهپیمایی می گذرد. اما اشکال ندارد، زیرا این ماه می پر از جشن بوده است. منظورم این است که ما روز مادر را داشتیم، عید را جشن گرفتیم و هفته آمادگی استوری را فراموش نکنیم. شما شرکت نکردید؟ فکر میکنم شما نمیدانید که من در مورد چی صحبت میکنم. این خیلی مهم است. هنوز زمان برای تهیه کیت های اضطراری و تزیین خانه هایتان وجود دارد. تا محل های خروجی را با اوضاع مشخص کرده و محل تعیین شده ای را که در صورت اضطراری با خانواده خود ملاقات میکنید مرتب کنید. نگاه کنید. خوشبختانه در این کشور خطر یک فاجعه انسانساز کم است و بسیاری از ما یک فاجعه طبیعی را که منجر به تلفات شدید جانی شده است تجربه نکرده ایم. اما همانطور که مولانا حاضر امام به ما یادآوری کرده است، هیچ دلیل برای سهلنگاری وجود ندارد. خطرات ناشی از آفات طبیعی در هر بخش از کشور واقعی است و ما باید آماده باشیم و بدانیم که در شرایط اضطراری چی باید بکنیم. حالا جمعه شب است، نیازی به وحشت و ترس نیست. ما میتونیم این کار را با هم انجام دهیم و میتونیم کم لذت نیز ببریم، در حالی که در مورد خطرات و نحوه آماده سازی برای اطمینان از امنیت خانواده و اعضایمان را یاد میگیریم. بنابراین امشب این همان کار است که ما انجام خواهیم داد. ما در ابتدا با سخنان رئیس صاحب کانسل ملی امیر علی قاسم لاکا شروع خواهیم کرد. سپس در مورد خطرات آفات طبیعی در سراسر کانادا خواهیم فهمید. سپس می‌آموزیم که چگونه یک بسته اضطراری را تهیه کنیم. خواهید دید که من تمام تلاشم را کردم. خب پس از آن یکی از اعضای جماعت که فرصتی برای خدمت به نهادهای آسیای مرکزی برای توسعه استراتژی‌های آمادگی اضطراری را داشته است بشنوید. و همانطور که قبلا گفتم ما این را بسیار جالب خواهیم ساخت. بنابراین این کاری است که ما می‌خواهیم انجام دهیم. ما می‌خواهیم مسابقه کهوت خود را برگردانیم تا ببینیم واقعا درباره آمادگی در موارد اضطراری چقدر می‌دانیم. بنابراین مطمئن شوید که برنامه کهوت خود را دارید و ما با زودی رمز را با شما به اشتراک خواهیم گذاشت و پس از آن یک بازی جالب خواهیم داشت. به طور معمول ما برنامه خود را با اجرای موسیقی به پایان میرسانیم، اما امشب قصد داریم برنامه خود را با اولین فیلم شاهزاده محمد علی به عنوان نزدیک به خانه به پایان برسانیم. این فیلم در برگیرنده تأثیر زمین لغزش 2010 است که دریاچه عطابات در دره هنزا در شمال پاکستان را تشکیل داد. بیایید اکنون از رئیس صاحب امیر علی قاسم لاکا استقبال کنیم.
My dear brothers and sisters, Ya Ali Madad.
برادران و خواهران عزیزم، یا علی مدد. امروز می‌خواهم در مورد آمادگی برای شرایط اضطراری و اهمیت آن با جماعت صحبت کنم. بلایای طبیعی مانند زلزله و سیل واقعیتی از زندگی است. بدون هشدار قبلی اتفاق می‌افتد و می‌تواند خسارات زیادی وارد کند. این بلایای طبیعی به خاطر تغییرات اقلیمی به دفعات زیاد به وقوع می‌پیوندد. از آنجا که این وقایع هر روز اتفاق نمی‌افتد، با آسانی آمادگی را فراموش می‌کنیم و خود را در معرض خطر قرار می‌دهیم. آمادگی شامل حفاظت از دارایی‌های ما و توانمندسازی خانواده هاست که در صورت بروز یک فاجعه با سرعت واکنش نشان دهند. پس چگونه باید آماده شویم؟ اول، هر خانواده نیاز به یک پلان چاره‌اندیشی دارند. اینها اقدامات فوری در صورت وقوع یک فاجعه است. چگونه خانواده اعضای خود را گرد هم جمع کند، از خانه خود محافظت کند و محل را تخلیه کند. با طرح‌ریزی یک پلان باید خطرات مرتبط با محل زندگی خود را در نظر بگیریم. بعضی از مناطق سابقه طولانی زلزله را دارند. برخی دیگر در معرض خطر آتش سوزی و برف‌کوچ قرار دارند. در همه این مناطق احتمال سیل، آبخیزی طوفانی و گردباد وجود دارد. ما باید با برنامه‌های اضطراری تهیه شده توسط شهرداری خود آشنا شویم تا بدانیم که در شرایط اضطراری چه خدماتی برای ما انجام می‌دهند. ما می‌توانیم در سیستم هشدار شرایط اضطراری شهر ما ثبت نام کنیم و درباره سیگنال‌های پیش از وقوع حادثه اطلاعات کسب کنیم. ما اطلاعات خاص شهرداری را از طریق پروگرام‌های دیجیتالی خود با جماعت به اشتراک گذاشته ایم و از جماعت می‌خواهیم که لطفاً این اطلاعات را مرور کنند. دوم، باید از اموال و مشاغل خود محافظت کنیم. دهه‌ها طول کشیده است تا جماعت ما مستقر شوند، خانه، تجارت و زیرساخت‌های خود را بسازد که باعث بنیاد اقامت ما در کانادا گردیده‌اند. بدون اقدامات محافظتی ما خطری از دست دادن اینها را داریم. ما باید با مهمترین دارایی‌های خود فکر کنیم و اینکه چگونه از آنها محافظت کنیم. هر خانواده باید پوشش بیمه‌ای کافی را در نظر بگیرند. صاحبان خانه در مناطق پرخطر باید نیاز به بیمه زلزله و سیل را ارزیابی کنند. ما نمی‌توانیم فرض کنیم که در صورت این خطرات ما پوشش بیمه‌ای داریم. هر پالیسی بیمه فرق دارد و ما تا زمانی که با مسئول بیمه خود مشورت نکنیم و حق بیمه را ارزیابی نکنیم، جزئیات آن را نخواهیم فهمید. این امر برای سرمایه گذاری و املاک تجاری نیز به همان اندازه مهم است. نهایتاً ما باید بیمه وقفه در کسب و کار و تجارت را در نظر بگیریم تا در صورت بحران از کسب و کار خود حمایت کنیم. در طول دهه‌ها مولانا حاضر امام ما را در مورد آمادگی برای شرایط اضطراری به تدبیر و آینده‌نگری تشویق نمودند. مؤسسات آماده است با شما همکاری کند تا مطمئن شویم شما آمادگی لازم را دارید. بیایید با هم کار کنیم تا از عزیزانمان و دارایی‌هایمان را که برای ساختن آن یک عمر زحمت کشیده ایم محافظت کنیم. برادران و خواهران عزیزم، جدا از این موضوع، مؤسسات جماعتی با همکاری شرکای خارجی در حال تدوین برخی برنامه‌های جالب آموزشی به جماعت است که در عرصه انتقال به مشاغل در حال رشد آینده مفیدند. این کورس‌های کوتاه مدت 3 تا 4 ماهه است که می‌تواند فرصت‌های شغلی پردرآمد را در بزرگترین شرکت‌های کانادایی فراهم نماید. این مشاغل شامل علوم و داده‌های کامپیوتری، تجزیه و تحلیل امنیتی، بازاریابی دیجیتالی، مدیریت تولید، آموزش فروش آنلاین، تصویرسازی داده‌ها و غیره میباشد. هیچ آموزش قبلی یا تجربه‌ای لازم نیست. بعضی از کورس‌های آموزشی با هزینه کم و یا رایگان میباشد و شرکای ما شغل‌های اختصاصی را در دسترس جماعت قرار میدهند. در بسیاری موارد در پایان آموزش ارتباطات با مدیران استخدام این شرکت‌های با رشد سریع برقرار می‌شود. ما این فرصت‌ها را برای جماعت تهیه می‌کنیم و به توجه آنها می‌رسانیم، زیرا بعضی از اعضای جماعت در شرایط قرار دارند که اگر شغل فعلیشان در خطر باشد باید به دنبال گزینه‌های جدید شغلی باشند. این امکانات عالی آموزشی برای همه فراهم است و ما باید این مطلب را به خانواده‌ها و دوستانمان بگوییم. این کورس ها در ماه جون شروع می شود. من همچنین می خواهم توجه شما را به 3 پروگرام دیگر نیز جلب کنم. گوگل پروگرام کوتاه مدت با گواهینامه را ارائه می دهد که با آن می توان کار خوب پیدا کرد. لطفاً به این هم فکر کنید. ما در حال همکاری با دانشگاه رایرسن هستیم که کمپ‌های تابستانی را برای دانش آموزان دوره دبیرستان در رشته‌های مهارت‌های نرم افزاری، هوش احساسی و ارتباطات برگزار می‌کند. این را هم مد نظر داشته باشید. نهایتاً ما ماه آینده پروگرام جالب را تحت عنوان 10,000 چای آغاز می‌کنیم. این پروگرام پایگاهی را برای افراد حرفه‌ای، رهبران صنایع، مربیان، مشاوران و آنهایی که به مشورت نیاز دارند فراهم می‌کند تا بتوانند در سرتاسر کشور برای 15 دقیقه یا یک زمان چایخوری با همدیگر رو در رو تماس داشته باشند. از این طریق جماعت به موفق‌ترین استعدادهای کشور، هم از افراد حرفه‌ای و کارآفرین‌ها برای 15 دقیقه دسترسی پیدا می‌کنند. این امر فرصت برای استفاده از تجربه بهترین استعدادهای جماعت ما برای یادگیری از یکدیگر است. اگر در زمینه کاریابی، آموزش یا شغل خود به کمک نیاز دارید، اینها گزینه‌های آینده نگرانه‌ای هستند که باید در نظر بگیرید. لطفاً در صورت علاقمندی به تیم آینده کار تماس بگیرید و یا به وبسایت ما مراجعه کنید. تشکر از توجه شما و خدا حافظ.
ممنون رئیس صاحب. خیلی خوب. بگذارید عصر امروز با مهمانان ویژه خود صحبت کنیم. هر یک از مهمانان ما عصر امروز تجربه هدایت در هنگام یک آفات طبیعی را داشتند و با لطف موافقت کردند که تجربیات خود را با ما به اشتراک بگذارند. ما محترم شهردار ناهید ننشی را که از سال 2010 شهردار کلگری بوده است با خود داریم. در سال 2013 جنوب آلبرتا بدترین سیل را در تاریخ ولایت تجربه کرد. شهردار ننشی تیم مدیریت اضطراری را هدایت کرد و اطمینان حاصل کرد که مردم اطلاعات لازم برای ایمن ماندن را دارند. ما همچنین رئیس کانسول بریتیش کلمبیا سمیر منجی را نیز در کنار خود داریم. در سال 2015 و تنها چند هفته بعد از انتصاب وی بود که یک طوفان شدید در مناطق گریتر ونکوور تأثیر گذاشت و باعث خسارات گسترده و نیاز به پاسخ نهادهای جماعتی شد. آیشا راجوانی، او یک مدیر ارشد برنامه با کمک‌های بشردوستانه فوکس کانادا بود و طی طوفان یخی سال 2013 که جنوب آنتاریو را تحت تاثیر قرار داد، آیشا تیم‌های پاسخ را هدایت کرد. او اطمینان حاصل کرد که فوکس و مؤسسات جماعتی به نیازهای جامعه پاسخ می‌دهند. لطفاً از پنل ما استقبال کنید.
Thank you so much for joining us today on another edition of Friday Night Reflections. So let's just get right into it. Aysha, I'm going to talk to you right now, just as being a part of Focus. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience working with natural disasters here in Canada?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. In 2013, Eastern Canada was hit with a massive ice storm and snowstorm. And picture this scenario. Freezing rain across the region, sub-zero temperatures, high winds, all coupled together to take down trees, downed power lines, all of this creating havoc on an electrical distribution grid. And across Eastern Ontario, over 300,000 residents were affected. And they were affected because they didn't have power in their homes. Some of them for 5 hours, some of them for up to 7 days. And as an institution, we had to come together. So Focus, leadership of the Jamaati institutions in Ontario and the Council for Canada put a core team together to lead the emergency response effort during these massive ice storms. And we knew that all the planning that we had done, we had to quickly mobilize, because of those 300,000 residents, 6,000 were members of the Jamaat. And of those 6,000, 500 were highly vulnerable. And they were vulnerable because they were seniors that were living alone, seniors and others who had mobility limitations and sensory impairments. And so we really need to quickly mobilize if we had any chance of minimizing the impact to the Jamaat and creating quickly support systems to get them through what could be a very, very challenging time. And so we did a few things, and I'll share some of the things we did during that activation. Firstly, we quickly put together a monitoring and communication team that was regularly looking at Environment Canada alerts, that was fanning this out through a mass SMS system that we had set up so institutional leadership were aware of what was going on. We quickly had to establish command and control. And in emergency management, one of the best practices is establishing an emergency operations center, an EOC, that really provides command and control over an incident. We also had to activate assessment teams that would be looking at our institutional assets like our Jamaat Khanas. Do they have power? What are the access routes like? How are the parking lot conditions? And during this week of the ice storms, Jamaat Khanas were closed for the first time in a long while for all across the region. All Jamaat Khanas were closed because they didn't have power, because of the hazardous driving conditions to reach those Jamaat Khanas. And then we quickly had to put together support systems. When Don Mills Khani was confirmed to have power and to be safe, we activated a warming center in that Jamaat Khana where hot beverages and snacks were being provided at the center. We activated a call center. Jamaat was being called to check, are they safe? Do they have any support requests, whether it's health related or food assistance? And of course, we also activated a hotline where Jamaat could call in if they had any concerns. And together, this helped kind of provide that assurance and that comfort to the Jamaat that there was support there if they needed it. And finally, we had to really target our response to the seniors, those that were most vulnerable. And through a mapping exercise, we were able to see which Jamaati buildings where we had seniors in those buildings were actually mapping to the power outage zones, and we could target efforts to support those seniors. So over the course of those 4 critical days during the ice storms, volunteers delivered personally over 2,000 meals, hot beverages to these seniors over a course of 4 days. It was truly an amazing, effort. And, I would have to say that for the Jamaat, this ice storm event, this crisis event, was probably the most widespread, the longest running coordinated emergency operation that the institutions had to activate during this time.
Wow, that's just impressive. Mayor Nenshi, you're in a unique position, being the mayor of a city. So it's like, this is like beyond your Jamaat. And when you're taking care of the people in in Calgary, what is that like when it comes to the natural disasters that are happening in your city?
Well, first of all, we are so lucky to have this level of community support that we have in the Jamaat, and it's pretty incredible that we have our own emergency operations center, for example. But I'll tell you, when I was first elected mayor, I was the first mayor in 30 years who had not previously served on city council. So there was a giant fire hose of orientation of all these different city managers coming to talk to me about things, and I still remember when the head of the Calgary Emergency Management Agency came to see me. And the very first thing he said was, in the history of Calgary, we have never declared a state of emergency, but you need to understand what will happen if you need to declare one. And in my brain, it was all triage, right? I was trying to learn everything at once. So as soon as I heard we have never declared one before, I probably stopped listening at that point and thought this is something I can learn much later. So as it turns out, in the entire 136-year history of the city of Calgary, we have declared a state of local emergency exactly 3 times. And lucky me, I got to be mayor for all 3 of them. So we had to learn a lot, or I had to learn a lot. But the good news is that we had prepared for it. And that's really the theme, right? It's about preparation. You can't control a disaster. You can't control the floodwaters. You can't control the way that the fire spreads with certain limitations. But what you can do is you can be prepared. And so the previous mayor and council had actually spent on emergency preparedness. We built a brand new emergency operations center, which is probably the best in Canada, if not in the world. And the first time I ever walked into our emergency operations center was on the night of June 20th, 2013 during the flood. But it was there. And the folks who worked at Calgary Emergency Management were there. In fact, before this current pandemic, they had a pandemic plan, what we would do if we ever had a viral pandemic. And so that kind of planning really mattered. And we were also lucky in another way in that we have dealt with so many disasters in Calgary since I've been mayor. Maybe it's just me and my bad luck, but we've had floods and fires and explosions and windstorms, and of course now a global pandemic. But I remember the very first one, which was a real windstorm that was going through Calgary on a Sunday afternoon. And so we had to close down downtown Calgary because it just wasn't safe. Panes of glass were hanging from construction sites that could come crash to the ground at any moment. And in particular, we had to close the corridor where the train runs. The train runs above ground in downtown Calgary. And we had to close the corridor where the train runs because there were literally things hanging over the train stations that could crash down. And so I went down there on a Sunday evening, probably around 5 p.m. And this is one of the big things that I learned and a lesson that I've kept in mind all this time, which is emergency operations people are amazing and emergency operations centers are amazing, but they are based on an entirely can-do attitude. They're based on the best scenario of what we can do. And so when I went downtown that day, I said, well, do you think that the train will be open in time for rush hour tomorrow morning? And the answer I got was, we're going to make it happen. And I said, that's not the question I asked, right? The question I asked was, how likely is it that it won't be open? And they said, well, we're going to try hard, but we don't know. And so I said, okay, let's tell people that. And I realized that in too many emergency operations centers, the communications function is not front and center because people are focused on solving the problem instead of on telling people what's going on. And so they said, well, we're going to keep working. And then late tonight, if we can't open it, we'll make a call at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I said, you know what, that's not good enough. Because right now across the city, you have people who are sitting down to supper and they might be watching the news, or after supper while they're washing the dishes, they'll be watching the news, and we have to give them time to plan their day tomorrow. So we actually have to get out now and say to people, there's a high likelihood that the train won't be running for rush hour in the morning. We'll have buses, but it'll take you way longer to get where you're going. It was midterm season for university students. And we said, so if you got an exam, you got to leave way early. You got to make other arrangements. If you're able to work from home tomorrow, can you imagine back then, if you're able to work from home tomorrow was a very big deal. And if you're able to work from home tomorrow, you should. So what happened? The train didn't run the next morning, but we didn't have any problems at all at rush hour because people had the ability to plan. And ever since then, we've had a senior communications person sit at the decision-making table in the Emergency Operations Center to make sure that we're getting the right information out at the right time.
First of all, I don't think it's bad luck at all. Just what you've done is nothing short of incredible. And then just hearing what you have done in terms of being prepared is also amazing and a testament to your success as a mayor in Calgary. 2013 just sounded like a bad year. Like you guys were prepared in February, and then the thing happened in June, like a few months later. Can you talk a little bit about those floods that happened in Calgary?
Yeah, I mean, I have so many stories about the flood, and I've talked about it so very much. But that flooding, so one of the funny things about Calgary is where Calgary is located, just at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, means we're very close to the headwaters of our rivers. So if you're in Winnipeg, for example, and you know that there's going to be a bad seasonal springtime flood, you actually have several days to prepare because you can see the flood coming. So you might even have weeks to prepare. But in the case of Calgary, our headwaters are so close that if they start flooding, we have barely hours before that flood will hit the city of Calgary. And that's exactly what happened in 2013. There was a big rainstorm on a Thursday night in the mountains. Then the spring snowmelt hadn't happened yet, so the rain fell on the snow, causing the rivers to crest. I was actually in Toronto at the time, and I was giving a breakfast speech on this Friday morning. And during my speech, my chief of staff, who had been traveling with me, he was sitting in the front row, and he kept looking at his phone, and I was getting a bit offended. I was like, look, this is a great speech, pay attention. And then at some point he got up and left, which he would never do. And I thought, oh boy, something bad is going on, and it's only 5 a.m. in Calgary, what's happening? So as soon as I finished my speech, he pulled me off the stage and into the back room, and I talked to the head of emergency management in Calgary, who said, listen, it's going to be bad. And I said, how bad? And he said, it'll be 5 to 7 times worse than our previous flood in 2005. And so what happened was that when those floodwaters crested, on a typical day, the Bow River, which runs through the center of Calgary, on a typical spring runoff day, will be running at 30 or 40 cubic meters per second. And it crested that night at well over 300 cubic meters per second. And so it was fast and it was deep. So that flood ended up being at the time, the largest, costliest natural disaster in Canadian history. Over $6 billion in private and public damage. It's since been surpassed by the Fort McMurray fires, which were even more expensive. So Calgary is the not-so-proud holder of the 2nd and 4th most expensive natural disasters in Canadian history. The 3rd one was the ice storm of 1998 in Ontario and Quebec. The 4th one was just this summer, and in the middle of a pandemic. I don't think anyone even remembers what happened this past summer of 2020, which is we had a terrible hailstorm hit northeast Calgary, where many members of the Ismaili community, including myself, live. I still have holes in the side of my house. And we had tens of thousands of homes damaged, some of which were uninhabitable. But let me tell you the good news. The good news is that in the Calgary floods, only one person in the city of Calgary lost her life, which is one person too many. It was the toughest funeral I've ever been to. But only, I believe the final number was 4 or 5 people across all of southern Alberta. And in the hailstorm, nobody did. And that preparedness, although we had so much damage to property, we were able to protect people's lives and health, and that's what really matters.
Wow. Thanks for sharing all of that. And I can't imagine how tough that must have been. President Saib, tell me about British Columbia.
Thanks, Huse. And again, there are several examples I could turn to, but let me go back to August 2015. The leadership at the time had been appointed nationally, locally, just a few weeks earlier. It was an appointment cycle year, July 2015. We were all appointed to our respective roles. And a few weeks later, in late August, we had severe windstorms in various parts of the Lower Mainland in British Columbia. And I remember the first call I got was to inform me that we had power outages at multiple Jamaat khanas. And so again here, this experience taught us both the institutional preparedness side and the Jamaati preparedness side, and the importance of both. We had a relatively new council. We had individuals who had just several weeks later been oriented and had transitioned with their predecessor in understanding their respective portfolios. And all of a sudden, there was an engagement that began, including with our Jamaati Mukhi Kamriyas and Mukiani Kamris, because everyone was asking the question, what do I do? And that question was coming both from an institutional and Jamaati perspective, but also from a personal perspective. We knew that amongst the thousands of households in the Lower Mainland who had lost power, several hundred of those were Jamaati households. We were able to identify with our emergency operating team, we were able to identify which pockets of the Lower Mainland were being impacted. We were able to turn to institutional data to understand and reconcile through postal code information how many Jamaati families resided in those specific pockets and areas that were experiencing power outages. And that power outage in some cases lasted hours. In some cases, people will remember, lasted several days. And so our ability to then engage and harness our volunteers to reach out to those families, to ensure that they had what they needed, and if not, how we could provide support, assistance, and again, really leverage the safety nets that we have in place. Our care for the elderly team, who have a separate database of seniors, who, including those that live in isolation, and our ability again to intervene and to ensure that we were taking the steps necessary, first to communicate, as the mayor had mentioned, and the importance of that, and secondly, to then provide the support and assistance required, and third, because this lasted several days, to on a daily basis do those requisite check-ins with those individuals and families who were impacted. And then finally, on the institutional response side, again through our Property Matters team, to ensure that each of our Jamaat Khanas, each of these critical and important imamat assets, were protected, were safeguarded, and where they were affected, that we were able to take the steps necessary to mitigate and to address whatever needed to be looked after. To be cliche a little bit, that saying, hindsight is 20/20, and nobody can say today that we didn't know or we weren't warned in advance. The reality is natural disasters can come in very different forms. And the universality of some of those key elements of preparedness are very compelling. So for each of us individually, each household, each family, to do their part, to make sure they've taken what frankly are easy and necessary steps to prepare, to be in that state of readiness, to be knowledgeable, and to be ready to communicate as a family, because the likelihood of everyone being at home in the living room together when a natural disaster hits is pretty low. The greater probability is you'll be in different places, including inside and outside the home environment. Similarly, on the institutional side, we won't all be together in one room, odds are, when a natural disaster occurs. And yet we have to be ready to mobilize and ready to coordinate and ready to implement and take the necessary steps and actions to protect our institutions, our families, our Jamaat in the event of and when that natural disaster happens.
Right. And it's each and every one of us. That's a really good point you just mentioned, President Saab, that like not all of us are going to be in one room. I mean, during COVID, it sounds like it. Like movie night every night, but yeah, it's like that's a very good point that each and every one of us have to be ready to go. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you to all three of you for sharing your experiences and your advice. You know, you're right. It is a natural disaster is scary, but the more ready we are, the more on top of it and in control we can be. Thank you very much to the three of you for taking your time and being with us this evening on Friday. Yalla.
Yeah, with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
این می تواند واقعیت داشته باشد. اگر باور نمی کردید که آفت طبیعی شدید در اینجا نیز اتفاق بیفتد، این یک یادآوری جدی بود. اما همانطور که شهردار ننشی فقط گفت، اطمینان از امنیت ما نیز مسئولیت شخصی ما است و من حدس می‌زنم که من می توانم بسته استرایی خود را شروع کنم. جمع شدن اینها با آماده سازی بیش از حد نیاز ندارد. باید آسان باشد. درست است؟ خب خواهید دید که چقدر خوب کار کردم.
Okay, we're going to do something really simple. We're going to whip this little emergency kit together in a second. You'll see how easy it is. They just sent me this little text. It's a simple little list. Let's just go through this right now. First thing, easy peasy, an ID. Obviously, I'm going to put it in this bag right here. Got my ID. An emergency plan, which I printed out from the Focus website. So I'm going to put that in here. What else we got here? Some hand sanitizer. A breeze. Everyone's got this now. So hand sanitizer, that's in there. Extra keys. Extra keys. Got that. I love that. Toilet paper. Yo, do we need toilet paper? I just need a roll. Okay. Charger. I got a charger. Small bills. That's a good idea. Small bills. Oh, this looks like a This is a, ow, jeez Louise. Thank you, wherever that came from. Got toilet paper, that's great. I got a 50, so we need to go to the change pot to break this into smaller denominations, so let's make a mental note of that. Clothes, haha, look at this. Got my partnership walk sweatshirt, change maker, love that. Putting that in, plus some more clothes, that's important. Some extra footwear, a bigger bag, that's gonna be important. 12 liters of water, non-perishable food items, a can opener. I have a manual can opener, a flashlight, AM/FM radio. Who uses a radio? Extra batteries, extra scissors, a whistle. A blanket, garbage bags, duct tape, thermometer, hearing aids. Oh, if you need hearing aids, medication, candle, matches. Okay. So, well, you see this. You see the list. That's there. Look, if you have a lot of these things, that's great. You got to be set for a potential disaster, and you got to be safe for 72 hours. And a list like this is going to do it for you. But if you're like me and you don't have everything, the best thing you do is you go to this website, just head on over to Focus. They've got the entire list, and they even have a link that'll send you to a place where you can just buy everything, which is what I'm gonna do right now. So, excuse me. 12 liters of water, wow, that's a lot.
خب سفارش من موجود است و باید ظرف 3 روز کاری اینجا باشد. فقط امیدوارم که قبل از روز دوشنبه هیچ شرایط ناگواری رخ ندهد. خب یک نفر که مطمئن هستم بسته استوری خود را دارد، نشیر کرملی از ادمونتون است. نشیر کرملی در وظایف تیکین با اداره مساعدت‌های بشردوستانه فوکس در افغانستان، تاجیکستان و سوریه خدمت کرده است. بیایید بیشتر در مورد کارهای نشیر بشنوید.
Well, I had no clue about emergency kits until I joined Focus. In 2007, when I received my first phone call to go to Afghanistan, I was working with TELUS as a strategic projects manager. I also had institutional experience here, but the roles that I embarked on were something totally new. For 3 years, I was executive officer for Focus Afghanistan, another 3 years as head of Focus Tajikistan, and then as a consultant with Focus in Syria. These were amazing experiences, very challenging, but I also met some wonderful people that I worked with. Focus does both long-term community-based capacity building as well as shorter-term response to crises and emergencies. In March 2009, when I was executive officer in Focus Afghanistan, that time there was a very bad drought in Afghanistan. Plus the global prices of wheat had shot up. I remember receiving a call from the UN World Food Programme for Focus to urgently help deliver food to the northern areas of Afghanistan. We delivered food to families in Darwaz which were insecure and could not survive without assistance. The Focus Crossing team took on the challenge of delivering all the food that WFP had made available. And on the day before Navroz, I remember the head of the education department coming to thank the Focus team and to acknowledge that people had received the food so they would have meals for Navroz as well as the weeks to follow. In Syria, I was one of 2 Canadians who were assigned to support the Council for Syria. The key thing was that during a crisis, especially which spans across a country, you need to have excellent coordination. And our role was to create emergency centers which would facilitate that kind of coordination, as well as people who were trained to run the emergency operations center at the local level. One of the challenges was to get an old school in Al-Khawabi converted from being a disused school into an emergency operations facility. It took us 6 months, and the local team that I had supporting me was just amazing. It was a total transformation of a building that was leaking, was moldy, and they completely refreshed it and had it ready for us to use as an emergency center for training purposes, as well as for AKF and Jamaati programs, including children's camps and celebrations. One example of capacity building, empowering the community was in Tajikistan. According to the World Bank, Tajikistan is a disaster hotspot country and most vulnerable to climate change in Eurasia. With climate change, more glaciers will be melting, resulting in glacial lakes and outburst floods, or GLOFs as we call them. As part of its capacity building, Focus trains community emergency response teams, or CERTs, in the areas of first aid and search and rescue so that they can respond during a crisis. There was a village called Baroj and in Gorno-Badakhshan, and they noticed after the very heavy avalanches, very heavy snowfall, they noticed as the weather warmed up, a lake had formed above their village up in the hills. And they realized the danger because previously there was a place called Dasht which had experienced a glacial lake outburst flood where within minutes a whole village was wiped out. 25 people died. So the CERT evacuated the villagers to safe areas that Focus had previously identified. And they contacted Focus. The geologists and engineers came, and together working with the CERT, they planned a way to drain the water from that lake away from the village, so that after 10 days, the villagers were able to return to their homes. So this is a powerful example of how capacity building can help people during a crisis. What I've learned is that we all, as individuals, as families, as a community, we need to be ready for any emergency, any disaster that could hit us. The second thing I would mention is to take the opportunity, if you can, to go and serve in these places with the Focus or other agencies to help build capacity, to bring in best practices, which will enable these people to protect themselves in the event of a disaster and to respond to disasters very effectively.
چی تجربه شگفت انگیزه تأثیر طولانی مدت و کمک به جوامع در کاهش آسیب‌پذیری و افزایش مقاومت در برابر آفات طبیعی و انسانی. نشیر از اشتراک‌گذاری شما بسیار سپاسگزارم. خیلی خوب. بنابراین ما مدت زمان خوبی در مورد آمادگی اضطراری صحبت کردیم. با آزمون کهوت ما می‌دانیم چه مقدار. برای شرکت تمام کاری که شما باید انجام دهید این است که این کد دسترسی را درست در کهوت تایپ کنید یا اگر برنامه تلفنی همراه دارید فقط آن کد دسترسی را بزنید. آماده هستید؟ بیایید که انجامش بدهیم.
All right, let's get started. Question 1. Tornadoes most commonly occur A, from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., B, during tornado season of March and October, C, in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Southern Ontario, and Quebec, or D, all of the above. correct answer is D, all of the above. Question 2. Canadian cities with the highest risk of earthquake, starting with the highest. Is it A, Greater Vancouver, Nanaimo, Victoria, Abbotsford, and Montreal? B, Greater Vancouver, Nanaimo, Victoria, Abbotsford, Ottawa? C, Greater Vancouver, Nanaimo, Victoria, Abbotsford, Edmonton? Or D, Greater Vancouver, Nanaimo, Victoria, Abbotsford, Saskatoon? The correct answer is A, although Ottawa is also in a seismic area just after Montreal. Question 3. Hailstorm Alley is between A, Penticton and Kelowna, B, Red Deer and High River, including Calgary, C, Kitchener and Peterborough, including Toronto, or D, Burnaby and Halifax. The correct answer is B. Hailstorm Alley is a term referring to an area of south and central Alberta where hailstorms are frequent. Question 4. Your emergency kit should include supplies to last a minimum of A, 24 hours, B, until the next presidential election, oh geez, C, 72 hours, or D, 90 days. The correct answer is C, 72 hours. Question 5. Your emergency kit should include A, first aid kit, B, food and water, C, a whistle, or D, all of the above. The correct answer is D, all of the above. Question 6. A family emergency plan should include A, a meeting spot, B, family contact information, C, health and insurance information, or D, all of the above. The correct answer is D, all of the above. All right, how's everybody doing? Good? See, I told you you'd learn something this episode. All right, 5 questions left. Let's keep going. Question 7. Your family emergency plan should not include A, out-of-town contacts, B, neighbors' contact information, C, children's school contact information, or D, your favorite restaurant. I mean, come on. The answer is D. You should know what your favorite restaurant is. Mine is, my mom's watching right now. It's my mom's. Mom's, I love your food. Okay, let's keep going. Question 8. You should know about your municipality's emergency response plan to A, know where to go in the event of a disaster if you have to evacuate your home. B, to get a photo op with your mayor. C, to see a fire truck. Or D, to get your COVID-19 vaccine. Okay, the answer is A, to know where to go in the event of a disaster. But seeing a fire truck, especially with my nieces and nephews, that's always cute. But yeah, no, A is more important. Question 9. How can you find out more about your municipality's emergency response plan? Can you find out by A, visiting the Safe Buildings resources on the Focus Canada website, B, contact your municipality, or C, all of the above? correct answer is C, all of the above. Question 10. Focus Canada does the following. A, helps the Jamaat and others prepare for emergencies. B, trains volunteers for emergency response. C, provides relief for disasters in different parts of the world. Or D, all of the above. The correct answer is D, all of the above. All right, last question. Question 11. Here it is. Emergency preparedness is important because preparedness can A, save lives and property, B, can help reunify families, C, increase the resiliency of the Jamaat and community, or D, all of the above. The correct answer is D, all of the above.
در واقع این همان چیزی است که نمایش امشب در آن است. ایجاد انعطاف پذیری، آموختن و اطمینان از این که عزیزانمان را با کمی آمادگی حفظ میکنیم. و امشب به جای بازتاب موسیقی فیلم کوتاه شاهزاده علی محمد تحت عنوان نزدیک به خانه را داریم. در این فیلم 7 دقیقه‌ای شاهزاده علی محمد به شمال پاکستان سفر کرد تا با برخی از جوامع شجاعی که قرنها در برابر آفات طبیعی مقاومت کردند دیدار کند. او به الهام از داستانها اولین فیلم خود را به عنوان نزدیک به خانه نوشت و کارگردانی کرد. مستند درباره استقامت این جامعه در برابر آفات طبیعی. سپاسگزارم که امشب با ما پیوستید. در امان باشید، سالم باشید و یا علی مدد.
مطابق با راهنمایی‌های مولانا حاضر امام این بسیار مهم است که هرچه زودتر دوز اول واکسینتان را دریافت نمایید و هر وقت که دوز دوم در دسترس باشد به گرفتن آن اقدام نمایید. حالا که سیر کووید رو به بهبود است، اما هنوز در کانادا گراف مریضان که وضعشان وخیم گزارش شده است بالا است. بنابراین مهم است که همیشه پروتکل‌های صحی را در نظر داشته باشید. هر زمانی که بیرون می روید از ماسک استفاده کنید. 2 متر فاصله اجتماعی را در نظر داشته باشید. از جمع شدن در منزل با کسانی که عضو فامیل شما نیستند خودداری نمایید. از اجتماعات، برگزاری محافل عروسی و سالگرد و غیره که حیات شما و دیگران را به مخاطره می اندازد جداً خودداری نمایید.
किचन हो गया आपको मौजूद बम जगह में जाचुनी भाई तो टाइम में अचानक के झटका आवाज दिया तेज बात है मैं वापस में किचन बिल्कुल नाम निशाना नबी
उस वक्त 5-6 बज रहे थे। अचानक ऊपर से बारिश भी ज़बरदस्त तरीके से हो रही थी। अचानक सैलाब आया तो हम इधर से हमारे ये दादियाँ सारे भाग के, और उधर ऊपर से बारिश सर्दी बहुत सर्दी हो रही थी। हमने अपना वो मकान वगैरह के सामान वगैरह सिटिंग करके दूसरे टेंट में शिफ्ट होने के लिए। जब हम टेंट में थे तो वहाँ पे बहुत मुश्किल हो रहा था कि हमारी पढ़ाई भी रह गई थी। तकरीबन 1-1.5 महीने हमारी पढ़ाई भी नहीं हो गई, इसलिए वो उधर सर्दी भी बहुत थी, इसलिए हमने गुजारा कर लिया कि सर्दी बर्दाश्त करके।
This whole area is exposed to various kind of natural disasters, be it avalanche, debris flow, flash floods, rockfall, landslides, so you just name those. Our primary goal is to create resilient communities and make their life safe so they can see a better future for themselves in this area.
बस इसका कि सपोज मिनी रिस्कर बस ज़मीनी तो रिस्क रोल पर तो वो उसने वो पुरंगो बस बने हुए ज़मीन का पोरत बेट पिकार कोई भी ड्रामेज दिया तो समझो वो सुधारने की भी मोनिक सर पिकार खाल के ज़मीन पुरंद माँ यो बीज यो बदरम ज़मीन मुतासिर वास्त और बस मुझे फ़ायदा नहीं वास्त नहीं ज़मीनी तो खैर खुश्क وزن پیدا بدم خون گید که تقریبا 40 سال نسخوز آدم خون عالم رتبان دم حالت.
Our study shows that in Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral there are 50 such villages where major part of the village or the community are exposed to various level of hazards. The Aga Khan Agency for Habitat is working with the local communities to come up with a program for the relocation of these high-risk areas.
أشياء زميني إشخاني كزميني نان زي طغاش مشكلة لكن زي زاب فيوتشر دستان زي وسطهم قربانيان بردوات أتتم رزرير كي خزمان وفيوتشر دستان زاد ورياشت باتستان شويت خزمان ور خو مستقبل رفاتر وزياشت كوشيش سالن.
The people of northern Pakistan's high mountain regions have faced emergencies like these one after another for centuries. Lives have been lost, homes destroyed, and communities isolated. And yet people persevere and progress. They live with courage and hope in a place of both stunning beauty and the constant risk of danger. I, Ali Aga Khan, traveled to Pakistan and was honored to be able to hear their stories. Their resilience and bravery have inspired me to help document their reality and share their stories. At the Aga Khan Development Network, we have been working with these communities to build infrastructure, including mitigation walls to protect against rockfalls and landslides, bridges to reconnect isolated communities, and seismic-resistant buildings to protect against earthquakes. We have also built temporary shelters and new homes for families impacted by these natural disasters. The young people I spoke with feel a sense of hope and motivation to overcome these challenges. But these are daunting and we need your help. Learn about this region and these issues. Share this video. Follow us for updates about future events and fundraisers. In a world facing an ever-increasing amount of problems due to climate change, it's time to take action. Let us start here in northern Pakistan.